Welcome to Red River Rivalry, the podcast. This is Sean Swanda, the Oklahoma co-host. Right now I'm doing this one solo, and I mean, it should be somewhat reasonably obvious why. Yeah, it wasn't exactly easy to get together with Christian right away after the, metaphorical nuclear bomb of all-time OU Texas news dropped 2 hours before I had to go into my night shift pay the bills job yesterday. So so Christian was basically like, hey man, get this one in on your own, and we'll this is going to be a month long, a topic for months. We'll get Christian's thoughts the next time we have a full episode together, but just for now, this is the initial reactions to OU in Texas very strongly flirting with the SEC. Now, oh man, it's with my vocal article career, I have been strongly researching this for a while. I have seen OU to the SEC as a possibility coming for quite some time, just with how conference realignment has been conference realigning in my lifetime. And yeah, the the metaphorical nuclear bomb that it's Texas of all teams possibly going with us. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense, but considering that Texas is kind of the problem in the first place it's a little weird, but we will unpack a whole lot of stuff right now as it's a real can of worms. Conference realignment always is. That's what makes it so interesting. There are entire multiverses of possibilities about how this could go. But let's start with the announcement itself. It's essentially just a detail leak right now, and based on everything about it, it's got to have been leaked from the SEC's camp, because the timing makes absolutely no sense from OU and Texas's perspective, because we literally just had Big 12 Media Days. We are, a month and a half out from playing a Big 12 season? I mean, this is kind of the worst possible timing for OU and Texas, because, granted, we are the big brands of the conference. Everybody wants to beat us. They're always going to be hyped up to play us, but still, now on top of that, this could very well be an Oakland Raiders last season in Oakland, St. Louis Rams last season in St. Louis, San Diego Chargers last season in San Diego scenario. Big 12 football this year is going to be insane, especially if this does come to pass, because, your two best teams, Iowa State, you are a lot better than Texas right now, but your two best brands flirting this strongly with the hottest girl in town. Yeah. This is Armageddon hour for the Big 12. This is DEFCON 1. This is all of that. The scent of death, as if it wasn't already, is as strongly on the Big 12 as it can be. The Big 12 is the dead man walking to the execution chamber right now. It is basically over unless some sort of 11th hour change comes, because like I said, the timing makes absolutely no sense from OU and Texas' perspective, so the leak had to have come from the SEC's camp, and I'll start to get into why that makes all the sense in the world from the SEC's side of things. So, but I was trying to finish what I was But anyway, all right. To try to get into the details here instead of just the over dramatizing. So, if you're a soccer fan and you've played any of the video games in the Football Manager video game series, you basically know what the SEC is doing here. You're leaking the interest of one of your transfer targets just to unsettle the powers that be around him. Like, the SEC has leaked this information just to rile up the other 8 teams in the Big 12, just to test the resolve of the Big 12 and to divide and conquer, destroy it. That's what's happened. The SEC has leaked this information for that purpose, essentially. Because like I said, the timing makes no sense from OU and Texas's perspective. At least as I sit here, everything I've put together mentally tonight at work from thinking about this, I mean, this has got to be essentially what's happened. And as an underhand, sneaky, short-term tactic, this is the SEC throwing a bone to Alabama, trying to disrupt OU's potentially getting over the hump season in the college football playoff. I mean, come on. Because you have made our road on the field harder. Yeah, the on-field stuff is not going to be that different, because obviously everybody plays their best game against us anyways, because everybody wants to beat us, right? But the crowds of the other Big 12 schools, it's going to be more insane than ever if this really is a death tour. I mean, playing... Oh, shoot, I can't remember what our schedule is off the top of my head right now, but I'll be pulling that up here on Google. But, okay. Did we play Texas Tech at home or away last year? But, okay, but, I mean... Well, any of them. Crowds are going to be all over giving us more hell than we could have possibly imagined over this. I mean, it's just... Yeah. Okay, so... At Tulane versus West Carolina versus Nebraska versus West Virginia. At Kansas State, that'll be a big one, especially with Kansas State having been our bogey team these last 2 years. Red River versus TCU. At Kansas versus Tech. Okay, so having Tech at home is kind of mild, because, I mean, having to go to Lubbock's crazy atmosphere with this death news would have been tough. Same with Ames. We got lucky. We've got Iowa State at home. At Baylor, that's kind of mild. But Bedlam on the road. Everything that could possibly happen to Oklahoma State, especially if they're not coming with us. Bedlam on the road with this scent of death. It's going to be insane. Yeah. So, yeah, that was just a quick run through of OU's schedule. So, yeah. Okay, so just for the moment, let's assume that from the SEC side of things, just in a vacuum, that all they're doing is adding OU and Texas. Because that makes the calculus simpler. Okay? And that's the easiest calculus to come up with on projection. Okay? There's actually been appetite within SEC circles, independent of us, to have all Alabama and Auburn in the East earn division, just so that the protected rivalries part of the schedule can die. Because, I mean, if Alabama and Auburn are in the Eastern Division, then Alabama-Tennessee doesn't have to be a protected rivalry. Then Auburn-Georgia doesn't have to be a protected rivalry. If all of that's in the same division, then your old school SEC teams outside of LSU and the Mississippi schools are all in the same division. So all of that is well contained. And basically all the new kids in the block are all pretty much in the Western Division. So all of that kind of makes sense. So that would leave you with the Western Division for the SEC at 16 teams with OU, Texas, Texas A&M, Arkansas, Missouri shifted west where they should be, which it's technically a rivalry game, but it's really not. We used to have a trophy for OU, Missouri. I'm from the western part of the state, so I mean, in eastern Oklahoman, maybe that rivalry means more to them. I don't know, but it's technically kind of a rivalry game, but it's really not. I mean, but I will enjoy playing Missouri again if this does come to pass. I really will. Because Missouri games are kind of crazy. Missouri it's just kind of crazy. I mean, the 2007 Big 12 title game. 2007 in general is just the craziest college football season in all of all history, but that's one of those memories that lives forever, right? How many times that night did Brent Musburger say, number 1 Missouri versus favored Oklahoma. Number 1 Missouri versus favored Oklahoma. And obviously we took care of business. If we hadn't had that business in Eugene, Oregon, we would have had LSU's spot in the national championship game. And yeah. And I mean, number 1 lost that night because we did that. Number 2 in Pittsburgh lost that night to, ironically, West Virginia, if memory serves. And yeah. But to try to steer back to topic here. So yeah, Oklahoma, Texas, Texas A&M, Arkansas, Missouri, LSU, my in-laws. So yeah, what I said in the pilot about, yeah, it's not really a rivalry if you marry into it. Well, Oklahoma, LSU. Possibly the 2 strongest teams in the future Western Division. Possibly the 2 teams that are always fighting to see who goes to Atlanta for the Western Division. Yeah, over time, that's going to become a competitive rivalry. Yeah, but, it's grandfathered in. My wife and I have been married for, 5-6 years now? It's 5 going on 6. Yeah. Yeah, we're in 2021, but we got married in October. Yeah, 5 going on 6. So yeah, that's grandfathered in. Oklahoma LSU could become quite a competitive rivalry in the future. But like I said, grandfathered in. And given that LSU's been dodging playing us in recent years, because we've had a home-and-home non-conference contract on the books for forever, and they've been dodging playing us, because it keeps getting pushed back and back further into the future, and now, psych, bitches, it's a conference game. That would be funny. Yeah, and hey, just from the fan perspective, going to LSU with my wife to see all of my in-laws, it's always an amazing trip. And to have the excuse to try to schedule that around OU Death Valley games, I mean, hell, just this year, the thought of trying to make a doubleheader out of OU at Tulane and Green Bay at New Orleans was really enticing, but I don't have the budget for it. So yeah, that's a real thing. And that's going to be beyond interesting. Okay, and then I keep talking, but obviously the other 2 Western Division teams, if you know anything about geography, are Ole Miss and Mississippi State. And I kind of already mentioned it about how, I'd already kind of mentioned it. So yeah, that's Oklahoma, Texas, Texas A&M, Arkansas, Missouri, LSU, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State for SEC West. And then your SEC East in a 16-team SEC with this edition will be Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Kentucky. So yeah, Alabama and Georgia would have to play every year. And that'd basically be Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, taking turns winning the SEC East. And can you imagine how insane that competition would be? Especially for the rest of the Saban dynasty. I mean, projecting forward, after Saban retires and Alabama hopefully becomes a little bit more human, the cyclical dominance between Florida, Georgia, Auburn, Alabama, maybe even Tennessee coming back. Tennessee trying to be back is even more farcical than Texas trying to be back, but don't tell Peyton Manning, but I mean, or rest in peace Jerry White, rest in peace Reggie White, my Green Bay Packer legend. But then again, I don't know. I mean, Tennessee does have some built-in advantages, but it's a long road to hoe, especially if Alabama's magically coming into your division. Vanderbilt's cannon fodder. Kentucky's mostly cannon fodder, and South Carolina's mostly cannon fodder. So, but yeah, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, all fighting for one Atlanta berth for the SEC championship game. That's insane. And then us, LSU, and if Texas ever gets their crap together, and Texas A&M. I'm burying the lead on Texas A&M. Texas A&M had a somewhat legitimate argument for the college football playoff last year. And Texas A&M, while we joke about how they haven't, run wild with SEC life as much as people kind of thought they would, with having the SEC advantage of recruiting and the advantage of being a Texas school trying to recruit Texas kids. People thought, but I don't know, it takes time to build a program. So Texas A&M is slowly becoming the juggernaut they want to be. That's just not happening anywhere as fast as they were hoping. So that's kind of a foursome on one side and a foursome on the other side. If that helps Texas become what they want to be, and if Texas A&M becomes what they want to be, that's a strong foursome on both sides. That's pretty balanced competitive wise. But my Oklahoma, I'm used to beating Texas and Texas A&M, and I think that we can regularly do it. So that's what we're looking at there. And yeah, that's one hell of a conference. Now, to dig into Oklahoma politics, part of why this hasn't already happened years ago is that we thought OU in Stillwater, or should I be a little bit more respectful today? We thought Oklahoma State was always going to be a package deal because of President Boren and the relationships between the universities themselves. Because, as crazy as we get as fans, sometimes we forget these are actual schools. And, on the education side of things, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State are kind of cozy. For, the actual education side of things, of educating the state of Oklahoma, they're kind of on somewhat the same page, I think. I really don't think we wanted to split up. I don't think... they've probably been thinking this out for quite a while, and it's hard to believe. But then again, looking at the athletic side of things, who really wants Stillwater? There's no advantage to Stillwater. The population of Oklahoma isn't that big anyway, so just having the Sooners cut corners the Oklahoma market. Stillwater doesn't even have an interstate for infrastructure's sake. Obviously the Gundy era is a golden era. It's a golden age. And the program's growing. I'll give Oklahoma State crap till the day I die, but on the objective side of things, this is as good as Oklahoma State's ever been the 21st century, right? And still, it's kind of laughable how mediocre it is, right? So, what happens to Oklahoma State in the fallout is going to be really, really interesting, which we need to be getting on to that, because I'm sure that's some of what you've been tuning in for. So what happens to the other 8 Big 12 teams on this death? Okay, now let's start with the fairy tale. Would these 8 teams try to cling on to being those 8 teams as a conference for just a moment, just a flicker, just to see what they can do? Oklahoma State, Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, West Virginia, TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor. When you unpack it, you've got a Texas trio, you've got West Virginia, and you've got 4 teams that used to play in the Big 8. Those schools in a vacuum don't actually have that much in common when you really, really think about it. So asking those 8 schools to defy the odds, be Charlemagne, and hang on their own, yeah, I don't think so. They're all going to get carved up. So I've been trying to think, what are the most likely outcomes? Alright, to me, let's start with the simplest one of all. West Virginia. Truth be told, they should have been in the ACC from conference realignment on the onset. The ACC has basically gobbled up all of the quality former Big East teams. And West Virginia is kind of the last one of that class. Well, arguably Cincinnati as well, but kind of the last one of that class that's not already in the ACC. So West Virginia is the ACC and rejoining a bunch of their old rivals, getting back to their geography. It makes too much sense not to happen. West Virginia has to be in the ACC. Either that, or they're going to have to drop down to the American. Those are like the only two outcomes for West Virginia. Those are the only two things that make sense. So let's pencil that in as West Virginia ACC for right now. Okay, the cluster that I feel most familiar with for Big 8 feelings: Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State. There's kind of a lot of multiversal options here. The most obvious is that Iowa State almost has to go to the Big Ten. You get the Cy-Hawk Trophy into the same conference. You get a football program on the rise to hopefully become a Big Ten West challenger, because the Big Ten desperately needs somebody in the Big Ten West to step up and be a regular good challenge for Ohio State, or Michigan, or Penn State if they broke through, or Michigan State if they broke through, because the Big Ten, aligned geographically, is one-sided competitive balance-wise. There's a reason why they tried to do that legends and leaders crap, because they needed to for competitive balance, and it's just kind of bullshit. So the Big Ten, calling Iowa State exactly what they need might feel a little weird, but Iowa State growing into what they need to be, that just makes too much sense. Iowa State has to be Big Ten. I feel like the Hawkeyes will help them get there. The Big Ten is gigantic already. Off the top of my head, does the Big Ten already have 16 teams? They might, but then again, this is a brand new day. This is brand new conference realignment. This is the next wave. This is the freaking tsunami of conference realignment. And as I said in the NCAA video games wish list article I made for Vocal, NCAA kind of needs the ability to make even as high as a 24-team conference. That is insanely huge. But unpack it for a second. That'd be either 4 divisions of 6 teams or 6 divisions of 4 teams, right? And more than likely 4 divisions of 6 teams, right? So that would lead to conference semifinals just to get into a conference championship game. And while that would mean there'd be some teams in your conference you'd actually never see, and as some people would say, most notably College Football Chronicle, a YouTube channel I was admiring for a while, I remember he said once, I thought the whole point of a conference was to determine who's on your schedule. That if you're a player, shouldn't you play every team in your conference in a 4-year career? But with a conference that huge, that's just not going to happen. And but anyways. So anyway, an even larger Big Ten, I feel like Iowa State's kind of got to be Big Ten. I mean, crazy possibilities would be Iowa State ACC or Iowa State Pac-12, but culturally, it kind of has to be Iowa State Big Ten. So then you unpack it, what happens to the Kansas schools? Iowa State, TCU are the 2 best football teams right now, objectively in my opinion, but kind of Iowa State, TCU are the best 2 football teams of these orphans. Let's call it what it is. If OU and Texas do join the SEC on their own, it's 8 orphans we're talking about right here. They're objectively the best football orphans. But for the big picture, Kansas basketball is the best orphan. So who gets Kansas basketball is going to be that next domino in the story after OU Texas is decided. After, if OU and Texas is pencil and stone, chiseled in stone, OU and Texas to the SEC, what happens to Kansas basketball is the next storyline of conference realignment. So given though we've seen OU Stillwater, given that we've seen OU Oklahoma State be pulled apart, more than likely, is Kansas State as guaranteed a package deal as you would think? Because they've got the same thing going on that OU and OSU have. I mean, those two schools are actually geographically closer than you think, because when you're thinking about it, you picture Manhattan being in the central of Kansas or something, but no, they're actually both pretty close to East Kansas. Most of Kansas' population is in East Kansas. Being an Oklahoma Panhandle boy, I can tell you, Western Kansas is mostly no man's land. I mean, outside of Garden City and Dodge City, that's basically it. So yeah, is Kansas State a package deal? For argument's sake, right now, let's say it is. If the Big Ten decided they're going after all three in that cluster and have a nice special little break my heart Big 8 division within the Big Ten, reuniting Kansas State, Iowa State, and Nebraska, and technically Iowa, because I think the Iowa Hawkeyes danced with us in the ancient of days before they joined the Big Ten. Break my heart. If you have that reunion, that's adding 3 teams to the Big Ten in what's already, I believe, I should look it up for sure, what I already believe is a 16-team conference. Big Ten. So that would put the Big Ten at 19. Which brings up a wrinkle you knew had to be coming. Notre Dame. I'm scrolling through Big Ten's Wikipedia page here just to confirm. Wait a minute. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, the Big Ten's currently at 14 teams. That makes things a little simpler. Okay, so are you saying Kansas State, Iowa State are teams 15, 16, 17? Oh, yeah, okay, now I remember. With the vocal article, I was including sending OU and OSU to the Big Ten. That's why my numbers are 2 extra. Okay. So you're putting Kansas State, Iowa State in the Big Ten to bring them to 17. You got to even it off, right? So, Big Ten, team number 18. Could it be Notre Dame? Could it be Notre Dame? I mean, obviously Notre Dame's been flirting with the ACC. Obviously Notre Dame's pathway would be a little bit easier in the ACC because obviously outside of the Clemson dynasty, the schedule in the ACC right now is pretty much a cakewalk. But still, think about Notre Dame's rivalries, which, I mean, Notre Dame has a rivalry with everybody, but think about the strongest Notre Dame rivalries. Notre Dame, Michigan. Notre Dame, Michigan State. Notre Dame, Purdue. You need Notre Dame in the Big Ten Conference. You just do. You just do. It's what makes the most sense. You need Notre Dame in the Big Ten. And, I mean, if I really put it together, I'm sure Notre Dame has rivals in the ACC too, but you need Notre Dame in the Big Ten. So, that's a cluster that could happen. Your Big Ten is an 18-team conference with Kansas State, Iowa State, Notre Dame. Or, okay, let's say the Kansas schools go elsewhere. You could still have Iowa State and Notre Dame join and have a 16-team Big Ten. That'd be very interesting as well. I mean, hell, the SEC could have a good inclination to go after the Kansas schools, or be the brutal Ferengi they are, and hey, Kansas State doesn't have to come. Oklahoma's leaving Oklahoma State behind. Kansas State doesn't have to come. So, everybody's going to want Kansas basketball. The SEC could be after Kansas basketball. And Kansas would have one incentive to do the SEC, and that Kansas to the SEC would, drastically improve their football recruiting. But other than that, it would reunite with Missouri. They'd have the border battle back. Kansas, Missouri is one of an underrated rivalry. That one year Kansas football was actually good and made the Orange Bowl. Was that 2007? I think it was 2007. Has to be, because I was in high school. Yeah, I think it was 2007. But yeah, anyways, Kansas-Missouri is a very underrated rivalry. That border war for Kansas City, the Kansas City market, it's pretty legit. So, Kansas is sitting pretty here. Kansas can listen to the Big Ten. Kansas can listen to the SEC. Hell, Kansas could be independent and be fine for a year or two. But then again, like we mentioned with format change and the college football, well, not that Kansas would ever get anywhere near the college football playoff, but everybody's going to have to kind of have a conference. Independence is probably going to be a thing of the past. I'd imagine, I can't even remember who else is independent right now, but I think Army's still independent. I think Army will probably try to join the American, that kind of thing. So yeah, Kansas can sit pretty. Kansas can try to, are we going Big Ten? We going SEC? Both make lots of sense for Kansas. So for our purposes, we'll leave the AT&T and Big Ten intact for piecing together a single solitary timeline here. So that leaves deciding Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, and Baylor. Now, if you're the SEC and you're picking from just these teams, you want Kansas, you want TCU. Now, granted, OU and Texas are already giving you the Dallas market, but TCU is a growing program, but actually lives in the Dallas market. They've had Texas's number several games since they joined the conference. I think they've won like 5 out of 7 since they've won since they've joined the Big 12. And Christian wouldn't let me completely. I realized in hindsight, Christian kind of nicely sidestepped the Back to the Future 2 anecdote. And TCU has psychologically had their number through a lot of history, especially with the Back to the Future 2 thing. What's more permanent than Back to the Future 2? The scores are in the movie. Yeah. I can't remember what it actually is right this split second, and yes, Texas Christian upset Texas. Oklahoma destroyed Iowa State 52-0. It was a glorious Saturday. It's permanent. It's Doc, the flux capacitor. Yeah. All right. I should move on. I've already gone off 33 minutes here. I need to be trying to wrap this up here. You got to remember there's going to be other factors at play here with the SEC as well. Because there's other markets that are tempting to the SEC. If Miami was ever ready, SEC would take the Miami Hurricanes in a heartbeat just to get the Miami market. Florida State, before their recent decline, is attractive, but Tallahassee is not anywhere near as attractive as the Miami, Florida market. And hell, if you're going stupid bonkers, adding both and having all 3 major Florida teams in the same conference, that's enticing. Clemson's never going to do it because they're going to enjoy their cakewalk schedule in the ACC and dominating the ACC as long as possible. But the SEC would obviously take Clemson in a heartbeat. There are more factors at play here, SEC-wise, than just how do these teams factor into the West. So, it's interesting. TCU is actually going to be, interestingly, sitting much more pretty than Texas Tech or Baylor, just because they are the Dallas market. So TCU is going to be sitting pretty too. I mean, is the Big Ten really going to dip that far south? I mean, TCU has been bonkers geography before with the Mountain West. Is TCU going to listen to the ACC? Is TCU going to go Big 12? I mean, not Big 12. Is TCU going to go Pac-12? So, I mean, TCU, Texas Tech as a pair for the Pac-12 would make some sense. So, I mean, okay, I've only been to Lubbock once in my life, so I shouldn't actually talk about Lubbock, but especially living here in the 806. But, I mean, having Lubbock as kind of a connecting flight, if you will, for the Arizona schools for this expansion and everybody else. I mean, geographically, TCU with Dallas and Texas Tech with Lubbock makes a lot of sense for the Pac-12 if the Pac-12 is wanting to grab a piece of Texas. Baylor, we were joking about how Baylor's karma deserved to be terrible after what happened with them and the Art Briles scandal. And Baylor is just going to have to suck it up probably, because Baylor is going to be attractive to no one. I mean, outside of RG3, they haven't done anything in football. They haven't really done anything in major sports. Oh yeah, I'm forgetting they just won a basketball national championship. Yeah, hashtag basketball school. Okay, but still, from the football side of things, there's no natural home for Baylor. So, is Baylor's resurgence in basketball really going to be enough to get them into a major conference? Considering basketball is their flex right now, Baylor's best bet is probably to join the Americans. So that's stepping down to the group of 5. But with the 12-team college football playoff, how much is that going to matter? So saving Stillwater for last, I mean, Oklahoma State is odd man out here. Oklahoma State has a problem. Oklahoma State, with us not saving them. I mean, I think President Bourne had thought all of this through. That's why he was so adamant about protecting poor little brother. I mean, my inner Oklahoman is really excited about the possibility of, oh, look at how much little brother's in trouble. They might not be number 2 in Oklahoma for long. I mean, the Tulsa Golden Hurricane. Oklahoma State tries to say Tulsa is their market, but I mean, come on. Tulsa's our market because the entire state's our market. And Tulsa is the Golden Hurricanes market on their own. I mean, let's be real here. Tulsa's a decent program for group of 5 level. They're essentially kind of our AAA team. Yeah, in a slight metaphor. The Tulsa Golden Hurricane is always a fun game on the schedule. You know that they're going to have quality players and it's going to be a good tune-up game. You know it's playing an actual legit FBS team. And it's just always fun to have Tulsa on the schedule because, I mean, as a road game, it gives OU fans living in Tulsa a natural game to go to without having to come all the way to... Well, I mean, the drive to Norman's not that big a deal, but without going to Norman, you can watch OU in Tulsa as a Tulsa OU fan when that's a road game. Tulsa playing at OU, that's huge for the kids playing for the Tulsa Golden Hurricane because obviously a lot of them would have grown up dreaming of playing for OU. I mean, yeah, yes. Objectively speaking, Tulsa has a lot more interesting... Tulsa's... Well, that's all subjective, but Tulsa's, branding, uniform package is a lot more interesting than Oklahoma State's. I mean, they're both really, really good, though. Both have really good color schemes. If I get over my orange and black, anti-orange bias for 2 seconds. They both have good branding on that factor. If Oklahoma State's already sort of copying Oregon and wanting to wear a gajillion uniform combinations, but Tulsa could do the same thing too if they really embraced it. So, I mean, but if you put them in the same conference, if Oklahoma State actually dropped all the way down to the American, given time, Tulsa would end up being the better team. In a way. Probably. I mean, I get Gundy in the 21st century for Oklahoma State is the golden era outside of Barry Sanders' Heisman Trophy. Oklahoma State is a team that's regularly ranked every once in a while. They've given us a good fight in a lot of the recent Bedlam games. And as mediocre programs go, Oklahoma State's a good mediocre program. But historically speaking, there's just nothing there. And geographically speaking, there's just nothing there. So, what is Oklahoma State to do? Because they don't fit with the TCU Texas Tech pairing for the Pac-12. They've got kind of three options. American, which I'm kind of flexing just to be an OU dick, but the underdog here is Oklahoma State to the ACC. The ACC does need to get better B-list talent for their schedule. Hashtag Clemson, come on, play somebody. Oklahoma State to the ACC makes a lot of sense. Geographically, no. This is Oklahoma State being West Virginia backwards. That's the reason why I didn't want OU to have anything to do with ACC and destruction talks. But Oklahoma State to the ACC makes all the sense in the world. Because, I mean, let's be honest, Oklahoma State has a lot of hipster vibes. Oklahoma State would fit in well with the ACC when you think about the culture of the teams that are in the ACC. But is the ACC going to have better options to pair with West Virginia? Because this goes back to what does Notre Dame do? If Notre Dame goes Big Ten, the ACC needs a partner for the West Virginia edition. Also, the ACC would be thinking about it backwards. The ACC would be thinking West Virginia is the partner to the Notre Dame edition. But if Notre Dame to Big Ten were to get sewn up, then Oklahoma State makes a lot of sense to be the addition with West Virginia. But again, there's lots of football. East Coast population. Is the ACC going to rather grab Cincinnati? Cincinnati just gave Georgia all they could handle in the Peach Bowl. Cincinnati deserves to be in a Power 5 conference. In the Big 10 section, I should have been advocating for the Big Ten to grab Cincinnati. And, I mean, Cincinnati would be a good consolation prize for the Big Ten if they don't get Notre Dame. If you add Kansas State, Iowa State as the Big Ten, but you don't get Notre Dame, and you're adding all three Big 12 schools, Ohio State, you kind of have to suck it up. Big Ten kind of has to add Cincinnati, which hashtag Ohio State, Ohio State, hashtag go play your Stillwater. Ohio State, Cincinnati. It deserves to be an annual rivalry game. It really should. Granted, there's a gajillion colleges in Ohio, but Cincinnati is the only little brother to Ohio State that's actually a challenger. All the rest of those teams are MAC schools. Ohio State, Cincinnati. As a Cincinnati Reds fan and sympathetic to all things Cincinnati, except kind of the Bengals. I mean, the Bengals are a stepchild only a mother could love, but Cincinnati. Ohio State, Cincinnati. That's kind of a tango dance here. How does all of that shake out? Because the ramifications for Stillwater are, the dance card goes Notre Dame, West Virginia ACC, Big Ten, Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State. Oh, shoot. My mind went blank. I'm sure the point's probably obvious to those of you that have been listening closely. But anyways, I came up with a rotation here where the Big Ten was covered without Oklahoma State. Oh yeah, because Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, Cincinnati would be a 4-team addition for the Big Ten. So yeah. Oklahoma State's awkwardly waiting to see what Notre Dame does, kind of in a way. So if it falls against Stillwater, and there's no Power 5 conference for Stillwater, Stillwater almost has to join the American. It's interesting times. Like the drama at the beginning was well earned. It really is. The Big 12's being walked to the execution chamber, man. If OU Texas to the SEC is as legitimate as it sounds, the tea leaves have been growing and growing and growing on OU to the SEC for years. I mean, Texas to the SEC has been less obvious, especially with their spat with Texas A&M and all of that, and the politics of getting Texas to get over themselves. Because a lot of this is part of me on dreaming of Texas being in the SEC with us for the second season of the OU to the SEC vocal article series from me playing on NCAA 14. Part of that was like, yeah, for Texas to do it, they'd have to bite the bullet and let go of the Longhorn Network, right? But you unpack it for a minute. Texas doesn't necessarily have to give up the Longhorn Network, because Longhorn Network and the SEC Network are both ESPN channels. So it's conceivable that the domino that's got OU and Texas, quasi flirtatiously agreed here, could be that the SEC agreed to let the Longhorn Network exist in its current form. And I know the Longhorn Network has destroyed the Big 12. The Longhorn Network has destroyed OU Nebraska. The Longhorn Network has destroyed everything that was remaining from the Big 8. But if you step back and look at it just from the television perspective, how much longer is it going to be until every good college has their own version of the Longhorn Network? We're in the days of streaming. You add, how long is it going to be until ESPN Plus has a channel for every team in the SEC? Think about it like that. How long is it until there's a channel for every team in the Big Ten on a streaming service? How long is it going to be until there's a channel for every team in the ACC on a streaming service? How long is it going to be until there's a channel on a streaming service for every team on the Pac-12, which the Pac-12 network, when you look at your satellite on the channels you don't have, the Pac-12 networks is pretty good at how it's cut up already. The Pac-12 network already kind of has a channel for each little region of its conference. So if TCU, Texas Tech to the Pac-12 is how it falls, the Pac-12 can just create a new channel, Pac-12 Texas, done and dusted. There's your Longhorn Network for TCU and Texas Tech. And I mean, it kind of works. And when you think about it, Fox Sports Oklahoma, it already kind of is OU Network for us. Or I guess the rights just changed. It's Bailey Sports now, but you know what I mean. It's just the way Texas brags about the Longhorn Network and having it be added to cable packages and all over our region that drives everybody bonkers in a lot of ways. And obviously, having destroyed the Nebraska rivalry, that's really hard to swallow. But conveniently, we are renewing the Nebraska rivalry this year and next year. And I've been looking forward to that for so long. September 18th, Nebraska coming to Norman. I think, especially since we're going to need regular good non-conference games, OU Nebraska becoming even more regular in non-conference could be positive on the cards. I mean, I know it's already scheduled for the cluster here. It's already scheduled for 2030, 2031. Considering the non-conference schedule is going to be completely repackaged around, because any contracts we already have with the SEC would be pulled off from joining the SEC. So we'd have open dates we didn't have before, and would we just plug Nebraska into open dates from there? Would we plug Nebraska into our open dates from the LSU contract? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And an elephant in the room here is, would Bedlam survive as a non-conference game? Personally, I could do without it. I mean, we've won, 100 out of 120 Bedlam games, basically? I mean, I know that it's not round figures. If I had the heart to do so right now, I'd look it up. But basically, we win 5 out of every 6 Bedlam games when you boil down the percentage. Our winning percentage against Oklahoma State is better than... I mean, the way I wrote this in the article 2 years ago, Tulsa has a better winning percentage against us than Oklahoma State, technically. I mean, the only win since World War II was in the 90s, but yes, Tulsa technically has a better winning percentage against us than Oklahoma State. It's wild. It's Wild Wild West. It's conference realignment. It's silly season in college football. It is nuts. And I'm glad I gave you these raw reactions without actually watching RJ Young or watching Paul Feinbaum yet, because it is just that passionate and bonkers. Obviously, I'm on 52 minutes here already, just on 2 pages of notes, just on unpacking the probable 16-team SEC if OU Texas is the only addition, just unpacking what happens to the other 8 teams in the Big 12. And I mean, if you're still listening, you obviously love all this. You love the speculation. You're with me. You're engrossed on every word here if you're still with me. And I feel like we've really pulled it apart. We really have. I mean, another wild card that could possibly crop up is if the SEC goes beyond adding just OU Texas, then Stillwater gets a little giddy, hoping they can sneak in some way or another as a partner. But when you think about this, in a vacuum, look at it. If you put a gun to the SEC's head and you ask, are you going to add Houston Cougars or are you going to add the Oklahoma State Cowboys? You have to add one or the other. SEC, who are you adding? You'd add the Houston Cougars, just because the Houston Cougars have the advantage of being in Houston. I know they're currently a Group of 5 team. I know they're technically not one of the orphans, but they're technically a Houston team. Hell, the last time we had our little home and home with them, or I guess it was, or was it actually, or no, it was, well, it was basically home and home because the Houston leg was in Reliant Stadium, but I guess we technically didn't play them on their campus, but it was basically home and home. They beat us. That's a loss everybody's wanted to bury, but the Houston Cougars beat us in our one game of our home and home. The other game of our home and home, Oklahoma versus Houston and Norman, that game was more nervy than I would have liked it to be. OU won that game, but that was kind of De'Aaron King's coming out party beyond what he'd done in the other one. And that's part of why De'Aaron King is getting to enjoy a COVID 6th year of college football in Miami, Florida right now. What De'Aaron King did against Oklahoma. So, I mean, think about that, Stillwater. I'm sorry, but the Houston Cougars are more attractive to the big boy conferences than you are. Not to mention, the death of the Big 12 cuts the big boy conferences down to 4 conferences. So, another domino of that is that if there's only 4 Power 5 conferences now, Power 4, does that shake up the proposal of the 12-team college football playoff? Is that going to completely gum up the works and have them have to go back to the drawing board on the 12-team college football playoff? I sincerely hope not. Like I unpacked with Christian on our format change episode, the 12-team college football playoff format has its flaws in the guarantees for the top 6 conference champions, but even after some of these changes from conference realignment, how often is the 6th best conference champion not going to be a top 12 team in the country? I mean, granted, we're talking about a guarantee that it's 2 group of 5 teams now, but you open up the landscape to what it can be after the death of the Big 12. The group of 5 conferences are going to get better. Getting invited to the playoff, the group of 5 conferences are going to get better. You could argue that the better group of 5 teams, like your Boise States, your UCFs, your kind of sort of Louisiana Lafayette's, although they haven't actually really proved it yet, your Coastal Carolinas. You could argue that those teams will end up joining big boy conferences in this wave of realignment. I mean, making justifications for it is kind of hard, but I mean, Boise State to the Pac-12 has kind of been... I mean, Boise State kind of likes being the best little kid on the block in the group of 5, but if Boise State really wants to chase a national title, they kind of have to join the Pac-12 and build up the Pac-12. And I mean, just from the shits and giggles perspective, adding Boise State and Hawaii to the Pac-12 to make a Pac-14 has always been fun, just because of... It's a shame the Hawaii program isn't better. Give them better resources. I mean, aloha! Even more excuse to schedule Hawaii non-conference games. No, go take a vacation week. I mean, obviously you don't want to be thinking that when you're actually playing the games, but yeah, I mean, it's excuse for the fan base to schedule a vacation around Hawaii. I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously the Rainbow Warriors haven't really done anything to deserve it, but sometimes these things are a pageant contest, man. I mean, and so Oklahoma State's just kind of behind the 8 ball, unless there's already some sort of plan for Oklahoma State. And I mean, really, I believe I've been as sympathetic to Oklahoma State fans as I can be in explaining my thoughts. I mean, I've been a little bit of a jerk in voicing my Oklahoma feelings, but I feel like I've unpacked it as well as I can for you, Oklahoma State fans. You are screwed. You are... I can't think of the Big Bang Theory phrase right now, but you are as squarely up the 8 ball's ass as you can squarely be up an 8 ball's ass. I mean, you don't want to see it right now. You don't want to believe it, but it's true. If we really are going to the SEC with Texas without you, that's just where it's at. I mean, you can have a good life in the American Conference. You can be the class of the American Conference. Hell, you can get some college football playoff berths out of winning the American Conference. I mean, there's a silver lining to everything, right? I mean, the entire college football world has turned on its head this morning. If OU Texas to the SEC becomes... It feels pretty close. I mean, like I said, we unpacked earlier, this had to be the SEC's league. It just had to be, because the timing makes no sense for OU and Texas. But, I mean, I feel like my inner Vulcan has a lot of logic here. I feel like I am really, really on here. Now it's time for me to sign off and go see what R.J. Young and Paul Feinbaum said, I think. I mean, yeah, that's where it's at. All right. Good night. Good morning. Good evening, and good night.